So, for the final part, we'll look at improving the accuracy of eyewitness testimony, including the use of the cognitive interview. So, improving the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. So, cognitive interview is a method of interviewing eyewitnesses to help them retrieve more accurate memories. It uses four main techniques, all based on evidence based psychological knowledge of human memory. So, we'll have a look at the four parts of cognitive interview. We'll also look at the enhanced cognitive interview, and we'll have a look at a little bit of psychological research that supports the cognitive interview. So there's four key parts: context reinstatement, report everything, recall in a reverse order, and recall from a changed perspective. And then we've got the enhanced cognitive interview as well. But the four key parts are the first four bullet points. So if it asks you to outline the key parts of the cognitive interview, then you're looking at context reinstatement, report everything, recall in a reverse order, and from a changed perspective. So context reinstatement is where you recreate the environment and feelings. The witness should return to the original crime scene in their mind. So you would sit down and they would say, right, think back to the crime scene. How were you feeling? What was the weather like? What were your emotions at the time? Was there anything else that you can recall in the environment? Were the street lights on? All of that kind of stuff. And this relates to context-dependent forgetting. So the context in which we learn can help us remember because it acts as an external cue. So if you can go back and you can put yourself in that situation and experience that context again, that can act as a cue to elicit new information. The research supporting context-dependent forgetting that we've looked at previously in the forgetting topic is the Godden and Badley research with the divers, where they learn on land and learn on sea. And if they're in the same context, then they recall that information much better. Then we have report everything. So witnesses recall every detail of the event. So it's just basically tell me everything that you can remember, and even things that you think are insignificant. So like the color of the carpet, the color of the walls, where you were when you saw the crime happen. These details might seem insignificant to you as an individual, but they could actually be important to the police, or they might actually trigger some other more important memories. So for example, oh, what color was the carpet? Oh, it had a pattern. Oh, actually, I remember there were blood splatters on the carpet, something like that. Recall from a change. Recall in reverse order. So events should be recalled in a different order. So maybe start at the middle and go to the end, or start at the end and go back to the beginning. And this prevents people reporting their expectations of how the event must have happened. So if you're recalling it in from start to finish, you might sort of what the end point is, someone getting attacked. So you fill in gaps with your expectations of what would happen and what would lead up to that happening. So like, oh, there was an argument when there might not have been an argument, or it might have happened in a different way. So recalling a reverse order prevents you reporting your expectations. And it also helps with regards to preventing dishonesty. So it's harder for people to produce an untruthful account if they have to reverse it. Then we have recall from a changed perspective. So you should recall the event from another person's perspective. So for example, recall the event from the shopkeeper's perspective. If you're doing that, then it again disrupts your expectations of what would happen, and it also helps disrupt the effects of schemas on recall. So you know from your memory topic your cognitive approach, actually, which does also link into memory, the idea of a schema, and that you have a schema which relates to an event, and the schema helps fill in gaps. So if you're recalling from a changed perspective, it prevents you filling in the gaps using your schemas. So these are the 4 key parts of the cognitive interview. Have a look at some of the exam questions for this, because some of them have an item. Some of them you have to read really carefully, because it'll say something like, apart from, report everything, outline another bit of cognitive interview. So you need to make sure that you read those questions really, really carefully, because they can catch people out. Also, with regards to like the 4 parts of cognitive interview, sometimes it will ask you to a question such as, what could the police ask Martha to help her remember the event? And if that happens, then you need to make sure that you're phrasing it in a way that the police would phrase it. So, Martha, could you please recall every detail of the event, include anything that you may seem insignificant? And then that's from a police perspective. So just make sure you read those questions really carefully. Have a look at a few of the past paper questions on cognitive interview, and just see the different types of questions that have come up, and you'll see some patterns with regards to what the examiners want if you also have a look at the mark schemes. In addition to these 4 points, we've got the enhanced cognitive interview. So this is where the interviewer needs to know when to establish eye contact, when to relinquish it. They need to help the eyewitness feel relaxed. So they need to help reduce anxiety there. They need to minimize distractions. They need to get the witness to speak slowly, and they need to ask open-ended questions. So they need to know which questions to ask as well to help them report everything, or help them recall in a reverse order, etc., and help them elaborate on their answers. We have some research support for the cognitive interview and the effectiveness of the cognitive interview. The FAIR study looked at a meta-analysis, and this combined data from 55 studies using the standard interview and cognitive interviews. So the standard interview is just your regular police interview, and they compared them to the cognitive interview. And the findings suggest that the cognitive interview provided a 41% improvement of accurate information compared to the standard interview. So if you use a cognitive interview technique, according to the FAIR study, you will elicit more accurate information. The second study, Fisher, they trained police detectives in Florida in the use of the cognitive interview and compared their performance before and after training. And they found that after they were trained in the cognitive interview, their performance improved by 47%. So both of these pieces of research show that the cognitive interview is an effective way of improving the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. So in evaluation, limitation, it's difficult to measure the effectiveness of cognitive interview because different police forces use different parts of it. So Thames Valley Police use change perspectives, but others use reinstate context and report everything. So it's really hard if we're trying to make comparisons between the effectiveness of cognitive interview and standard interview, because not all police forces use all aspects of the cognitive interview. Research by Milne and Bull found that using a combination of report everything and reinstate the context produced better recall than any of the other combination of techniques in the cognitive interview. So it suggests that these two, so report everything and reinstate context, are the key parts of the cognitive interview. Strength, so there's research to support the effectiveness that we've just discussed on the previous point. And a limitation, a final one, is that the cognitive interview is time consuming and staff must be carried out to train, I don't know what I'm saying right now. Staff must be trained to carry out the cognitive interview. So you have to sit the police officers down, especially if you're doing an enhanced cognitive interview, and you have to teach them all of the key techniques. They have to be able to establish a rapport with the witness. They have to allow the witness time to relax. All of this is not just time consuming when you're actually conducting the interview, but prepping the police officers in how to do this is time consuming. So it's unlikely that they're going to use all of the aspects of cognitive interview, and it depends on the case itself, especially if it's something that's time sensitive, then the cognitive interview might not be appropriate. It also might not be appropriate for all types of crimes and all types of interviews that need to be conducted. So yeah, we've got research that supports the cognitive interview. We've got problems with regards to that it takes a lot of time and staff must be trained. So you have like you might only have a small number of staff that are trained to carry out the cognitive interview. So it can't always be used all of the time. Sometimes it's not appropriate to use all aspects of cognitive interview. And because of this, it's really difficult for us to measure the effectiveness because we can't make clear comparisons because not everyone uses all aspects of the cognitive interview. So what I would do with this topic is just take care when you're reading the question. So if the question talks about improving the accuracy of eyewitness testimony, then you need to be talking about the use of cognitive interview and whether it is effective and whether it is a good way of improving the accuracy. So you can say it is a good way in improving the accuracy because it uses things such as context reinstatement, which link to context-dependent forgetting and help people remember that key information. In addition, studies by Fisher have shown that if you use a cognitive interview, police officers' performance improves. So you can say that it is more effective to use a cognitive interview compared to a standard interview. However, when we're thinking about improving the accuracy of eyewitness testimony, sometimes cognitive interview might not be appropriate because it's very time consuming. Sometimes cognitive interview can't be used by all police forces because they don't have the time or resources to train all of the officers in using the cognitive interview. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, have a look at some exam questions for this. I know that a couple of years ago, it might have even been the last official A-level exam before the pandemic. There was a question about cognitive interview that caused a few issues with students. They found it quite difficult. So do have a look at some of the past papers and have a look at those questions. And have a look at the wording of the questions as well, because the question was worded as if to say something along the lines of discuss the effectiveness of cognitive interview. And students really struggled with that because they didn't understand what it was asking for. They just spoke about what the cognitive interview was, and they didn't really link it to the research that showed why it was effective and that it worked. And they didn't always counteract that with other research that shows that it sometimes isn't as effective, and sometimes it's not appropriate to be used, etc. Okay, so complete your worksheet, fill out all of the keywords, draw the diagrams of the models. Remember, if you draw in the diagrams of the models, you've got to make sure that you include that key information about the features of the stores, and you need a couple of sentences underneath to describe how the multi-store model of memory works and how the working memory model works as well. So like the idea that central executive is the initial system, and it divides information and sends it to one or two of the slave systems, etc. So yeah, if you're drawing the diagrams, make sure you add in additional information to that. Have a go at the exam questions. Have a look at some of the past papers as well, just to see, especially to have a look to see what type of research methods questions might pop up in memory. Have a little look through those past papers, which you can find on the AQA website.